Welcome to another episode of Leadership Lenses, our 15-minute podcast for school leaders. This is a very exciting time for us. Those of you watching video can already see our first live guest in the same place at the same time. I'm here with Rabbi Dr. Seth Grauer of Bnei Akiva schools in Toronto. And Rabbi Grauer is actually in Israel for a number of weddings of community members, which is the perfect segue into today's topic. Those of you who run schools know that you're not just supervising teachers. You're not just making sure that classes run on time and that discipline issues are dealt with. As head of school, you're also essentially running a community. You're almost half pulpit rabbi, half federation director, half instructional leader. It's something that many people on the outside don't see. And so we want to talk to Rabbi Grauer, who's built up Bnei Akiva schools to be a community and a force in the community in Toronto and beyond, about how you do that. How do you divide your time? How do you approach it? And hopefully we'll come up with some tips that you guys can try as well. So to start with, Rabbi Grauer, just give us like the 30 seconds on when you got to Toronto, how long it's been, what it's been like, nothing bad because this is public, and we'll take it from there.
Sure. First of all, thank you. It's an honor to be here. It's an honor to be in the presence of Rabbi Dr. Kislowitz, who is a personal mentor of mine, as well as to our school, and really a leader in this field and someone who we all look up to. So thank you.
Thank you.
I got to Bnei Akiva schools in Toronto 14 years ago, and the schools had up and down, I would say, years before that. At the time, their numbers were a bit low in terms of total number of students. They had about 190 students. They were having lots of financial troubles. There were issues in the community. And there were real questions as to what the futures of the school would look like. And I've had a lot of mazel. And Baruch Hashem, things have been very successful. And today we're sitting in a very different place. And the community and the schools, thank God, are really, really very successful on a number of levels.
Okay, and you've got two separate schools. I think you may be one of the only, if not the only, modern Orthodox day school in North America that has a separate boys building and girls building at the high school level.
Correct. Well, the schools were created over 50 years ago, and they were modeled after the Yeshiva Bnei Akiva in Israel. They're actually the only Yeshiva Bnei Akiva, or the only Bnei Akiva schools that operate outside of Israel. And in Israel, the boys and the girls, even if they're part of a modern Orthodox entity or modern Orthodox hashkafa, are two different schools. So as a result, the boys' high school, Yeshivat Or Chaim, and the girls' high school, Oparat Arot, operate on two completely separate campuses, two different buildings, two separate campuses. They share faculty. To some extent, they share resources in terms of fundraising and development, and the same business office, only one board of directors, separate administration that operate and run both schools, one head of school, one Rosh Yeshiva, myself, one principal, a general studies principal that operates over both schools, but sort of a balance. One graduation together, but other than that, all classes, all activities, all programs are completely separate.
Amazing. Okay, so you've got two buildings you're balancing. Incidentally, my kids I have a boy in a Yeshivat Bnei Akiva for boys and a girl in an Upanat Bnei Akiva for girls, so I can vouch that is still how it works here. And I've personally been to Yeshivat Or Chaim over many years, and most recently, just a few months ago, actually. And I saw the way that the community gathers. I know that your Beit Midrash in the school also hosts a minyan. So tell us a little bit about the interplay between Or Chaim and the community. How do you start to navigate that?
Sure. I'll say by way of introduction, I've often thought that there are three different layers of schools and how they relate to the community, based on the location, based on the city, based on the environment. And I'll split them up in the context of this because I think it's very interesting. First and foremost, you have, let's say, the five towns or Teaneck, or Manhattan, or Brooklyn, where you have these massive cities, these very, very large Jewish communities, in which you can't necessarily have one school community, meaning that Frisch is drawing kids from any number of different cities. Same thing is true for SAR or Ramaz or any school you pick in some of these large Jewish metropolitan areas. And in that regard, there isn't one shul or one area that is a feeder into the school. So as a result of that, it's very, very hard for the school to be the leader in the community because of the fact that the community is just so big. On the other side, you have, let's say, much smaller communities, something like a Memphis or a Philadelphia or a St. Louis,
Cleveland,
or maybe Cleveland, in which everything that goes on in the school goes on in the community, and they are enmeshed and intertwined in a way in which literally the exact same people, exact same students, exact same parents, everything surrounds one entity, school, shul, everything operates together. And then you have cities that are in the middle. And I consider Toronto to be in the middle. And the reason I consider Toronto to be in the middle is because on the one hand, the Bnei Akiva schools is the leader, I would say, within the religious Zionist world. The religious Zionist world in Toronto is pretty large, relatively speaking. We have Netivot HaTorah, which is the elementary school or the main feeder school into the Bnei Akiva high schools. But at the same time, there are other schools that feed into Bnei Akiva high schools. We also have a thriving camp Moshava. We have a Moshava Ba'ir, which is a day camp that exists in the city. We have a Bnei Akiva of Toronto program in which we're actually the only city that has full-time shlichim and a full-time executive director focused on Bnei Akiva. We have a Kol Torah Mitzion that is basically a standalone Beit Midrash for the community and is run by the religious Zionist community. And we have a thriving Mizrahi. And the Mizrahi is in many ways sort of the mothership that could drive many of these entities and really has developed over time. All of that for many, many years has run through the Bnei Akiva schools, in which part of my job and part of my role has been to ensure that every single one of these entities is successful. All the different tentacles come out from the Yeshivot Bnei Akiva, but they all speak towards the same mission. The reason this is unique is because it's a large community, but it's not that large that it's drawing from all different areas. We also have a number of shuls that sort of operate within the general auspices of the religious Zionist community or the modern Orthodox community, but they're big tent. So I often tell my students, let's take Old Panav, for example, I'll often tell them that if they were to be in Teaneck, they would be in 7 different schools. But because of the fact they're in Toronto, which is a little bit of a larger tent, so they come together in one school, even though hashkafically they're not necessarily the exact same. But that creates a very, very large religious Zionist context that brings everyone under this religious Zionist tent, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Number one, it makes sense. So if you haven't been to Toronto, I'll also just say geographically, you can't necessarily spend Shabbat in all of the different places. If you want to walk from where your student who lives furthest south in Toronto to your student who lives furthest north in Toronto on Shabbat, it would take you about 5 hours. Yes. Not something you're going to be doing. So you have to balance all of that. And I think that is one of the challenging factors because you're balancing running the school for people and families from slightly different ideologies, and then having that connection to the community. And so that connection to the community is where I want to dig a little deeper because I think it's a skill many heads struggle with. It's probably a little bit more political than educational, which means some educators are like, oh, no, I don't do that. And other educators just don't even realize that it's a thing. Like, how do you do that? How do you navigate that connection?
So the first thing you have to realize is, and I think this is critical, that you need to accept the fact that if there's any single element of the larger community that is not successful, you are not successful. You need to take personal responsibility for the elementary school, for the high schools, for the youth organizations, for the summer camps, for the local shuls. You need to recognize that if you want to succeed at your school, all of these pieces have to also succeed. And all of a sudden you realize it's part of your responsibility. You need to recognize that financially, all these institutions have to be successful in order for the community to grow. You need to recognize that part of your job is to bring people into the city who can help all of these institutions to succeed. For example, it's very hard anywhere to find, I would say, religious Zionist educators or educators who are mission aligned. Bringing mission aligned people into Toronto to teach our students is not simple, no different than the other community. We have challenges. Housing is expensive, cost of living is expensive. We live in Canada, which has its own set of challenges. Anti-Semitism has not been great recently. People don't love the Canadian government necessarily the way they once did. And all of these represent challenges for getting people to come to Canada. But if you want the community to thrive and the community to grow, you need to see this as your responsibility. So first and foremost is the recognition that every aspect of the community is your responsibility, and you cannot say, not my responsibility, not my problem, or not my issue. Right. You cannot simply say, I'm running a school, you deal with everything else.
Okay, so I'm going to say more, that sucks. That's like, because most of what we talk about here, and I've talked with other heads where they're like, I can't get to all the aspects of my job. I get 300 emails, 400 WhatsApps, 700 text messages a day.
Yep.
And I've got to supervise teachers. You actually have a teachers union in Toronto for the Jewish day schools, which is unique. I think only Flatbush, Yeshiva Flatbush is the only other mono-Orthodox day school that has that at the moment. Yep. And now you're saying, okay, well, I'm also going to worry about an elementary school. To be clear, not an elementary school you run. Yep. Not an elementary school you get to make decisions about. Bnei Akiva, Mizrahi. And so basically you're saying, I'm taking on like 4 more full-time jobs in addition to what it would take to run a school. And I know that I need to do that. There's no way around it.
Look, to be clear, I'm not running the elementary school or the local shuls or any of these necessarily specific organizations. Baruch Hashem, they're incredibly talented and wonderful individuals who are in charge of running each of these organizations, and they do an incredible job. But if you're asking the question of how does one ensure that from a community perspective these are successful, you need to accept responsibility for it as a lay leader as well. So meaning my professional job may be to run a high school, and that's what my board of directors will tell me is my number one responsibility. But from a community perspective, if I care about the community, then I have to almost take on a lay leadership job in which I come along and say, but all of these other organizations have to also be successful.
Right. Unless the water is there, right? We're not going to float on our own. You know, there's a supply.
Correct.
There's a supply chain that you have to worry about. Correct. Otherwise, you don't have kids, you don't have teachers, you don't have anything.
100%. If there isn't great rabbinic leadership in the local shuls that feed into my schools, then my families are missing something. If the local Jewish organizations that help support the youth movements are not successful, then my kids are missing something. If they don't go to summer camps that are inspiring them, then they're missing something. And then when they come back to the high school, then they're not going to be as successful as they otherwise would have been. So you want to have all of these organizations clicking. You want to have all these organizations operating in their optimum capacity in the best way possible. That helps everyone thrive. That's a vision of responsibility and an understanding that you cannot just pass the buck and say, not my problem.
Right.
That to me is component number one, which is critical.
So I want to highlight a few pieces in this, which I think are crucial for everyone. So number one, what we're saying here is broadening your perspective on your job. And we've talked before in this podcast about 2 related pieces. One is like, don't kill yourself, don't burn yourself out, don't become a martyr, work-life balance. And I think everyone who's worked with me has heard me say, you've got to set some boundaries. This is a marathon. You know, you're going to be here hopefully for 20, 30, 40 years, and your family's going to be here for that long.
So I'm saying the opposite of all of that.
Well, so I think actually it connects, right? Because what you're saying, and I've seen you do this very well, which is the head of school actually has to build the whole community. Yes. So in Cleveland, it was a little bit easier. Like you said, I ran Fuchs Mizrahi School. Rabbi Bnei Blau was leading Green Road Synagogue and the Rosh Yeshiva at Mizrahi School. We also had Camp Stone, which was connected. We had Bnei Akiva, which was connected. And we were all within walking distance. We're all there. We all could sit together any given day. So I was very fortunate in the fact that I had like-minded individuals. I had to do some community stuff, but not that much. You're one level over from that. Right. And you're actually addressing here, like what you're talking about relates to something Rabbi Adam Englander, I'm sure everybody remembers that, about 2 months ago, Rabbi Adam Englander was on this podcast and talked about the way parents see the school as an identifier and the social impact of the school and the shul and how that balances and the challenges there, which one can only address by taking a communal view and understanding that the role of the head of school is not to do everything. So you've brought in some really talented educational administrators who are balancing so that you understand we've got to supervise the teachers, we got to run the classrooms, but if we're not also managing the community, we're not going to get it.
I read a lot of books. One of the books I read this summer was A Disengaged Teenager, which is great. Highly recommend it. One of the points that it makes over and over again is the impact of the role of parents in the growth of a teenager. And this is something that's obviously been well documented and been, well established. community plays a significant role in that. And that's something that a school can't do alone. It needs a team in order to be able to help that to succeed.
Absolutely. And Rabbi Grauer and I actually started teaching at Ramaz High School together. We had a chavruta the summer, my first year teaching, I think it was your second, preparing Masechet Brachot before we went into teaching. And I remember being frustrated that I would see these kids all week, then Friday afternoon they disappear. And I have no idea where they're going, no idea what they're doing. And they come back on Monday and it's like starting from scratch to repair whatever happened over the weekend. Won't go into the details there. And then going to Cleveland, I'm sure it's similar for you going to Toronto. Oh, we've got a community here that's supporting it. Now, nothing against Ramaz. There's also a community, but one 100%. Sees the need for that. You can't do it 100%. On your own.
Look, I think there's another aspect which is of critical importance, which I've taken on very significantly in Toronto, and I think it's had an impact on the entire community, and that is to promote philanthropy beyond just your school. Meaning, one of, I think, the most significant responsibilities of the head of school is to ensure the financial sustainability and the financial success, the growth, the development of the institution for which they're responsible for. Obviously, in this case, the school. But from a community perspective, to recognize that if the school is financially successful, but all the other like organizations are not, that doesn't help you either. Meaning you need the shuls to succeed. You need the youth movements to succeed. You need the camps to succeed. You need the elementary schools to succeed. You need them to have nice buildings. You need them to have funds to be able to bring in talented, wonderful educators. All of that requires philanthropy. All of that requires stuck of dollars. But what it requires more than anything else is a vision from a leader that this is necessary, not just for your institution, but for all the institutions. Right. And sometimes that's difficult because, most people are focused on fundraising for their specific institution and how they're going to be able to use those funds. But there needs to be a recognition that even if the money is not going to my institution, but it's going to the larger community for which I represent, that helps my institution. That helps our families. That helps our community. So trying to raise the level of philanthropy significantly over all of the institutions that are connected to us helps everybody. Right. That's been a major focus of mine, and I think that should be a focus of any head who cares about the larger community and sees that as their responsibility.
Right. And so I would add to there that it should not just be a focus of every head who sees the community. It should be a focus of every head, and for the following reasons. Number one, a rising tide floats all boats. Yep. The more philanthropy, the better. Number two, you're in a connected environment, like we said. So the shul, the elementary schools, the others, they help you both practically and they help you, much more importantly, mission-wise, yes. Right? Because we're not just trying to make schools survive and Correct. Pay their budgets. We're helping grow amazing Jewish kids and Jewish leaders, and we need everybody. And number three, and I'll say that elevates you as a leader. So when I'm in Toronto, Rabbi Grauer is seen as a community leader. Now, that's great for your ego, right? Obviously, it takes a lot more time, but most importantly, it enables you to accomplish more, right? Because now you have a platform for which you can speak to the school's mission, investing in chinuch, broadly speaking, 100%. Not just for your particular demographic. And we've seen the impact in the community.
And I think it also allows you to speak on behalf of your community to Federation and to, let's say, those who are more to the right, in more of the yeshivish or Haredi community, and try to create partnerships and develop working relationships with those who are not necessarily directly in your community because you're seen as representing your community. So I worked very closely with Federation in particular. We've done a lot of projects together, which honestly has brought a lot of funding towards our community, which is of critical importance. And I've, through those relationships, been introduced to a lot of philanthropists who wouldn't necessarily be directly connected to our community, but all of a sudden have started giving to our community. And the same thing is true in, more of the right community, I would say, in Toronto, where they're developing relationships with us, giving and supporting our community because of my leadership role that I've been able to take in my community.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's absolutely true. And I would say if you're a head of school, think about this. Think about what it means to be a political leader, that investing in things that feel like they're not your job actually make your job a lot easier, enable you to reach for much, much higher goals. If you're more at the principal level and you're supervising teachers and maybe you have a head of school above you, so then I would say recognize that when they're not in the office on Tuesday morning at 9, it may be because they're doing something really important. And in fact, the pressures internally can push you one way or another. So I know that Rabbi Grauer has wonderful educational administrators who say, we're going to do this part, Rabbi Grauer. We know you do that part. Together we succeed. I've worked in other places not to be named right now where the educational administrator is saying, head of school, why aren't you here every minute of every day? And the head says, sure, I can do that. But there's lots of other things in the short and long term that aren't going to happen. And so if we bring these roles together, ultimately we can really take the school to new heights.
And by the way, in order to do that successfully, the head of school needs a president and a group of lay leaders who get it. Absolutely. And who understand what you're trying to accomplish, who understand what your mission purpose is, and who understand that in the long run, what you are doing is far greater and will impact the community and help the community grow in ways that it never would. So it is critical that you have a board president that is fully aligned and understands that communal role in a very meaningful way, which I have been blessed to have, and I have right now in an unbelievable way.
And that's a lot of the secret between of Bnei Akiva schools, I would say, resurgence in Toronto after decades of being good but struggling on various 100%. Levels to, having gone from good to great. So if you're listening, try this out in whatever way works for you as a principal, as a head, and let us know how it goes. You can reach me, as always, on LinkedIn, Barry Kislowitz, Substack, Leadership Lenses, or our website, kislowitzconsulting.com.